other side, Trump has warned, we're looking at US and Iran, who both said, get ready for tonight. We've tried to decide what could happen 8 hours from now when Donald Trump's deadline ends. What exactly is the so-called revolutionarily wonderful moment that US president is hinting at? With threats and attacks escalating, concerns are now also shifting to possible war crime implications if civilian infrastructure is targeted. Joining me now is former US Marine Intelligence Officer, Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, with an exclusive breakdown on what could unfold in the next few hours. On a night, President Donald Trump has said that the whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I'm joined by former Marine Intelligence Officer, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. Good evening, sir. It's an honor to have you on the show. What do you make of President Trump's latest warning, a whole civilization will die tonight? Do you think the strikes that have already begun will go right to the finish?
Navika, all I have to say is President Trump is somewhat known for his rhetoric, and he obviously destroying an entire civilization. That's not going to happen. But what we probably will see, depending on what occurs today, I mean, we will find out, if Iran decides to reopen the Straits, if some agreement, and I don't rule that out. But President Trump has already indicated that he'll be looking at power plants and bridges. And what that would do is it would be a huge strike on just basically how Iran runs as a country, basically shutting down a lot of economic activity. Now, what I understand, Pentagon lawyers, and this is kind of the process, is every target that's looked at goes under legal review. And we have lawyers that look at that and say, does it comply with international law, the international laws of armed conflict, Geneva Convention, among other things. So every target is looked at. Although in war, bridges and power plants, if they are providing support to or involved with a military purpose, then they are lawful targets under international law. So I would anticipate we're going to hit a series of lawful targets, but those bridges and power plants also support the civilian population. So there will be an impact. If we go after that particular target set, there will be an impact across Iranian society.
But Lieutenant Colonel Kempfer, do you really think somebody in the Pentagon is sitting and looking at fine print of laws at the moment? I don't know how many have been broken so far, but the manner in which this conflict is going, just the statements. The fact that President Trump says we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter and less radicalized minds prevail. Is there really a change? What are we seeing on the ground? And is there a connection between reality and what we read on Truth Social?
Well, I haven't seen a big change in the regime. What I see now is a regime that's just as radical as it was before. A lot of questions if Mojtaba Khomeini, the new supreme leader, if he's actually functional, if he's able to do anything, because nobody's seen or heard from him directly. And it looks like the Revolutionary Guard Corps' leadership is basically running the country from what we can tell. Even the president of the country was basically saying things at the same time the Revolutionary Guard Corps was doing something completely opposite of what he was saying, indicating that he doesn't really have control over what's happening in the country. So, but yes, I do know for a fact that that is the process you see with the U.S., with NATO countries, a lot of countries, most countries around the world. There, in terms of selecting targets, there are literally lawyers right there to look at it from an international law perspective. If we're going in and we're taking out, for example, if the U.S. goes in and targets a power plant that has a dual use for military and civilians, that's a lawful target. Now, if Iran's firing missiles into Dubai and hitting hotels, well, that's not a lawful target under international law. And by the same token, it wouldn't be for us. Now, do mistakes happen? Yes, and we have seen some mistakes in terms of targeting that's happened in Iran with Israel and the U.S. that occasionally they hit things, but those are mistakes. Those are just, and those happen. You try to minimize them as much as possible, but sometimes you hit the wrong target or there's collateral damage that you didn't anticipate, and those things do occur.
So when President Trump says a whole civilization will die tonight, what is he talking about? Is he talking about massive civilian casualties? Is he talking about nuclear apocalypse? What is he talking about?
Well, certainly this, there was a lot of discussion out there is he talking about nuclear war, nuclear weapons or anything like that? I've seen nothing to indicate nuclear weapons. I think it's just his rhetorical flourish. He's not talking about a lot of civilian casualties. He's not talking about, nuclear weapons. I happen to I know a few things about nuclear weapons. I may have had reasons to look very closely at occasionally there's tensions between Pakistan and India that you may recall over the many years. So, yes, I've had reasons to look at that very closely, but I haven't seen anything like that. I think this is just his rhetorical way of talking about how this will be a really big strike. Obviously, probably not the language that anyone's used to in the international community, but that is the way that he's describing it. In some ways, it sounds a little bit like some of the over the top rhetoric that we sometimes hear from some other countries. I'm thinking of North Korea comes to mind. Kim Jong-un will say things and we all shake our head and say, well, he's not going to do that, but what's he talking about? Well, I'm sure that there are many around the president right now are saying you might want to back that off a little bit, because that's a pretty strong statement.
Is somebody actually saying that to President Trump? Because yesterday what he put out and the colorful language full of profanities, that's not something anybody is seen in public life, at least at the international levels, for a while. So is anybody telling him to recalibrate, to back off, do you think?
I think there are some. I don't know that they prevail at the end of the day. Obviously, yes, I read that, what do you want to call it, that text that he sent out with the profanity laced in there. And I can say in my experience, I've never heard a president of the United States use that language in any format, except if they were caught in a hot mic moment off the stage or something. But it was a little bit surprising, but it does, there's an interesting thing with President Trump. He says things for effect. He does things and sometimes he'll say things to make a point and then he'll back way off. In terms of actions, he'll say things are one point, but in terms of actions, it's somewhere else. And if he was trying to express his anger and frustration with Iran over these negotiations, over what's going on there, I would say in that regard, he's probably achieved that. I don't know how much stronger he could have said it to make clear that he's very frustrated with the Iranian regime.
Well, so the question tonight is, do you think IRGC will respond to the strikes that have happened, are happening today? And do you think Iran has the wherewithal to hit back and hurt American interests in the Middle East?
Well, I think they're doing it already. I think they're hitting a lot of American interests. They've been firing on U.S. bases throughout the Middle East, Persian Gulf area. They've been firing at critical infrastructure, particularly, for example, liquefied natural gas in Qatar. The U.S. has a very large air base in Qatar. They've been firing into Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan. Of course, they've been firing into Israel constantly. So, yes, they do have that, but their ability to do so is diminished. I'm kind of wondering what strikes are planned. One of the things that's kind of different, that's kind of a gradual thing that's occurred throughout the course of war, is that we're able to bring in, the U.S. is able to bring in large bombers like B-52s and B-1 bombers. These carry enormous loads of ordnance that allow for hitting different targets, for example, where they keep ballistic missiles, hitting them with heavy bombs that do deep penetration to underground facilities and tunnels, these underground missile cities, as the Iranians call them. And so there's some capabilities there that have really changed. And I'm kind of wondering, and I'm sure Tehran is wondering, how they will be employed should strikes occur this evening. And I would say, as far as will this happen, again, I don't know for sure. I would be surprised to some extent if the Revolutionary Guard Corps came back and said, yes, we're going to reopen the straits and we're going to do all these other things that have been asked of them. I don't think they can go there. I don't think ideologically they can go there, because it would be such a huge change in the nature of the regime that I don't think that intellectually they can actually make that big leap.
So what then happens? Regime change, you said, not quite changed so far. If President Trump, is he going to target the Straits of Hormuz and open it up, at least achieve that goalpost that he set out at the beginning of this conflict? What is it that he's looking for in order to declare this as an American victory? And will he get it tonight?
You know what's interesting? That is an option. And part of that is because of the forces that have been pushed into the area. We have a Marine Expeditionary Unit, very, very robust, capable unit, capable of doing amphibious raids, potentially taking small islands like the islands in the Strait of Hormuz. We have two of those Marine Expeditionary Units are in the area. We have lead elements of an airborne division that are in the area. So that does open up the possibility of doing things directly militarily in the Strait of Hormuz to militarily reopen the strait. Now, with that said, there's going to be a need for an international coalition to go in and clear it out to make sure all the sea mines are taken out and everything else. That is a problem that the U.S. has, is we don't have that many minesweeper ships. Other countries do have a lot of minesweeper ships. So we'll probably see some sort of multinational combined task force at some point. And I think the British meeting that they did virtually with 40 countries might be the nucleus of that will help keep the strait open. But you could see potentially, and certainly Tehran understands this, that there is a possibility of quote, U.S. boots on the ground, if you will, actually going in there and militarily opening up some of these sites. But I think that's also, at the same time, that's a full pressure campaign. That is a pressure campaign on Tehran to say, open the straits, don't push this to the military end state. Let's come to an agreement here.
But Tehran has today said no more talks, no messages also to be exchanged after the latest strike. So where does that leave us? And President Trump, when he started off, said this war could take 4 to 6 weeks. We are in the 6th week. Is it a fight to the finish, or are you looking at some more prolonged activity in this area?
I don't rule, even though they say, no more talks and stuff. I've been through this a lot, where I've seen these things where they go, there's absolutely no more talks, and then you find out everybody's been talking. They just haven't been doing so publicly. I think Pakistan is playing a huge role behind the scenes. They are basically an interlocutor between the United States and Iran. I don't think those discussions have gone away. And certainly for domestic consumption, the Iranian regime will say, no more talks, we're going to stand tough, we're going to do all these other things. Talking about building, putting human chains around power plants and things. Yes, they'll say that, but on the other hand, I often find there is discussion that is in dialogue that's going on behind the scenes, and I don't rule out an 11th hour sort of arrangement that forestalls military strikes. But I'm not holding my breath. I'm a realist, and I've seen where this war has gone so far. I've seen what was going on that actually was before the war, with a frustration that led to military action. So it's very likely we could see strikes tonight. But I am obviously concerned what Iran's retaliation will be if those strikes take place.
We can just wait and watch on how far and how long this devastation is going to carry on. We leave it at that. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel, for joining me on the Newshour tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.